Welcome back to Turning Hard Times to Good Times. I'm really pleased to have with me once again John Rubino. John, of course, he's been here so often, I don't know if it's necessary to tell you, but he does run the website dollarcollapse.com. It's an excellent website, a lot of great information, some of those articles are written by John, but other authors as well. And one of the things I like most about what John does is he provides once a week his top 10 videos of the week. And I think the other week he had 12 of them in there, and he still called them the top 10. John finds a lot of great information, a lot of very interesting people. So, for example, right now he has the most recent one. Some of the people that he had, Max Kaiser was interviewing Alistair McLeod. He's got Jim Rogers, Rick Rule, Jim Rickards, Gerald Celente, and many others. Very noteworthy and very interesting discussions. I think very informative and valuable in terms of the opinions that these people have. So I just want to, it's dollarcollapse.com. You should all avail yourself to that service. Thank you for joining me again, John.
Hey, Jay, good to be back. And congratulations on all your little stock picks going through the roof in the last few months. So has Teresa figured out what to spend all your new money on?
She's not the big spender. I'm more the spender. So she's very conservative, thank God for that, because otherwise our balance sheet wouldn't look as healthy as it does now. And no, I have to tell you, John, you and I were talking before we, during the commercial break. The name of the company is SK Mining. SK Mining. And you were just asking me about Skeena, which is a company I covered, and you said that they were coming up with Great Bear-like drill intercepts. That doesn't surprise me. I did cover Skeena. We made a nice profit on it. But Quinton Henning is involved with SK Mining, and SK Creek, that deposit that Skeena has, is next door. And in fact, these types of deposits come in clusters. And I think there's a very good chance that SK Mining could come up with something very significant. So that's the name of the company. I couldn't think of it, and then as we were ready to go live, it came to me. So, and I just mentioned that. Well, anyway, there's many issues, and I mean, this is what sort of the positive side of life in these four dimensions of time and space is that we do have the reality. A certain amount of reality has to come home, doesn't it? I mean, we can have all kinds of crazy stuff going on that seems to make no sense. But one thing that does make sense is gold holds its value and silver holds its value. And so, no matter what happens up there in your neck of the woods, now you and your wife, you're up there in Washington State now. You did live in Idaho, but you moved up to Washington State. But I don't think you're anywhere near Seattle, are you?
Well, we're a ferry ride away from Seattle, which means it's, that's far enough to feel safe. But I tell you what, though, I feel less safe than I did back when I was in Idaho, with all the stuff that's going on, because it's a little too close to comfort with all the civil unrest, et cetera now. Yeah.
So Seattle, and how long is the ferry ride for you?
It's a short drive, then a ferry ride, then another short drive to get to Seattle. So it's maybe 50 miles, but it's maybe 2 hours altogether.
Yeah, okay.
So it's far enough away to keep the rioters away from the town we're in.
Yeah, we'll see. You're at Seattle and Portland. Of course, Portland has had, I think, almost 3 months now of every night riots and burnings and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. What do you make of this, John? I mean, how do you explain it? Does it make any sense?
Well, first of all, it's heartbreaking because these were great cities to hang out in. Portland especially was just a really nice place to be. Mm-hmm. It was a small city, so you could get around very easily, but it had all the big city stuff in it that you would visit a big city for. And now it's like a ghost town. So to explain it, maybe it's good to take a couple steps back, because just as Donald Trump isn't the problem for the left that they think he is, he's actually a symptom of the underlying problem. These riots, I think, are also a symptom of the underlying problem. They are not the problem themselves. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that the 99% in the U.S. and also around the world were being harvested by a small aristocracy that figured out how to game the banking system back in the 1990s and then used that power to take over the government, basically. And so they have set up public policy to enrich themselves at the expense of everybody else. And an example to make this understandable is interest rates. When the government cuts interest rates to unnaturally low levels, that bids up the value of financial assets like stocks and bonds, which are mostly owned by rich people. So the rich get richer. Meanwhile, regular people who want to put away a little money and then generate a little income safely on it can't generate any money on their savings. And retirees who thought they were going to live on 6% interest in bank CDs find that they get no interest, and so their life gets much, much harder while the rich get much, much easier. And so people are all frustrated out there, but we're filtering our frustration through different lenses based on our own experience and our own, political beliefs and everything. So the left sees capitalism as the big evil, and the right sees the left as the evil that has to be opposed. But really, George Soros and the Rothschilds and Jamie Dimon, they aren't part of the right-left spectrum. They're sitting above this. And I think they might be hoping for street battles between right-wing and left-wing peasants to turn into something serious enough so that they can declare martial law and then really ramp up the harvesting process. Because under martial law, they could cut interest rates to -3% and get away with it. Yeah. Which would totally enrich them at our expense. So anyhow, that's my theory of this case, it would be good if we would respond to that by seeing the humanity in the people who are disagreeing with whatever our position is on a lot of issues, and understanding that we all have a common enemy, because that's the biggest fear, I think, of the 1%, is that the peasants figure out that they don't need to be fighting each other. They all need to, grab their pitchforks and head to the castle with their torches and get back what's been stolen from them. But until that happens, and it's not happening now, this process is just going to continue. They're going to cut interest rates more deeply going forward, and they're going to push up asset prices more aggressively. If they have to directly buy stocks, they will do it now in order to keep the stock market going up. So this process is not over. Yeah. And the pain that regular people feel is going to intensify before it's over. So it's a very scary time.
Yeah, it is. It is frightening, and I wonder. It seems to be more the young people, and my idea, John, is that young people, a large number of them who have their university degrees now, and if you talk about harvesting, I have a sense that universities have been harvesting people as well. Everybody has to go to college and get a degree, whether they have any interest in intellectual pursuits or not. And you got to get that degree so that you can get a good job. But if the good jobs aren't out there because of some of the reasons you just touched on, you destroy capitalism by not allowing price discovery of capital, in my view. So, John, my thinking is that we haven't really had capitalism. If the left wants to look at capitalism and say, see there how it is, I guess, I had a roommate who was on the left side of the political spectrum some time ago, and he used to argue, but Jay, that's what capitalism is. It's about trying to get government to change the laws in your favor so that you can harvest people. But no, I said no. Capitalism, pure capitalism, there's no government involved. It just allows people to trade with one another and get along with each other. But when you have, governments, Ron Paul used to make the point all the time that whenever governments get involved, they make enemies. They generate enemies by passing laws because they pass a law that hurts one group and helps another. Any comments on that?
Yeah, well, here's where we went wrong. We had a fairly decently functioning, mostly capitalist system through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. But during the 1990s, the central bank, the Federal Reserve under Alan Greenspan, got the idea that it was okay to bail out the big banks every time they got into trouble. Yeah. So we had a series of mini crises, the long-term capital management implosion and the Asian contagion and Mexican default and Russian default, none of which would have been systemically dangerous to the whole system, but they were dangerous to the big banks who had lent a bunch of money to all of these things that were going bankrupt. And the Fed stepped in and bailed them out every single time. And then in the 2000s, they went one step further and decided to push interest rates down to zero and as a way of supporting the financial markets. And then when the resulting housing bubble blew up, they bailed out the big banks who kind of engineered the housing bubble instead of letting them fail. And so capitalism requires failure in order to function. You have to have somebody push the envelope because, it's all about pushing the envelope and finding better ways of doing things that hadn't been known before. And that involves risk, So some people who do that are going to fail. You have to let them fail to teach everybody else what not to do.
Right.
But we have done away with that. We've in our system now decided to never let the big guys fail and always structure the financial markets in a way that saves them when they're wrong and enriches them when they're right. So basically what we have is socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor, and it's exactly the opposite of the way it should be. There should be a basic social safety net to round off the rough edges of the system and help people when they're in danger of falling through the cracks. But there should be absolute free markets in terms of failure at the top. So if JP Morgan Chase invests in the wrong thing, they eat the losses. And everybody else says, oh, okay, well, we won't do that. And so the system gets healthier by seeing what doesn't work. Well, we've done away with that. So now you're right. You cannot call this capitalism anymore. Yet, a lot of people still see it as capitalism and blame the concept of capitalism when things go wrong. Yeah, that's what makes this so tricky right now, because people are focusing on the wrong enemy in a lot of cases without necessarily understanding why they're doing that. They've just been told things that aren't true and they've accepted it, which makes what is coming very scary, because people are kind of, we're tribal now. We don't trust anybody who disagrees with our basic view. They don't trust us, and it's very easy to dehumanize each other and to be open to violence happening to the people who disagree with us. And that's just terrifying, It's
very sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to think that that the problem goes back, or let's say when we went off the gold standard, that then started to loosen things up so that the problems you're talking about, with Alan Greenspan bailing people out. I think you go back to 1987 and the stock market crash. I remember how there were no buyers for the strongest companies in America. The Wall Street Journal wrote about it. 1987, I remember that crash. It was extreme. And that's when the Plunge Protection Team, or the President's Working Group, was created in order for the government to step in and try to make things, to keep things from falling completely out of place. So I would actually go back to 1987 and that mindset. But earlier than that, if we hadn't gone off the gold standard, the kind of money that was available to redistribute wealth started to loosen up so that the government could spend more and do more things overseas with its military-industrial complex. More socialism was available. As long as you didn't have to tax people, the politicians could keep giving programs away and get reelected, right? So, but John, I want to ask, here we are. I'm in New York City, in Queens, actually, and I don't get into Manhattan. I don't think I've been in once since the COVID breakout. Try not to go in there but I see pictures of, New York City's most iconic stores along Fifth Avenue boarded up. And the wealthy people are leaving. Lots of really rich people just getting out of Dodge, getting out of New York City fast as they can. One real estate guy said in one of these recent months he had more business in that month than he had in the entire year last year. I think it was up in Connecticut. It's obvious that what's going to happen to these cities now? And are you seeing the same thing out in Seattle and Portland and that sort of thing too, I would imagine, right? The wealthy people wanting to get out, and will the corporations follow then?
Yeah, well, the hottest piece of real estate right now is a homestead. In other words, a little piece of acreage that you can grow food on. That's what everybody wants. They want to be out of big cities. And, okay, the scary part of this story is that a lot of big cities were functionally bankrupt before this whole pandemic / social unrest thing started, because they'd let their infrastructure crumble and their public sector pensions run out of control. They were totally unfunded pensions in a lot of these places like Chicago and New York and a lot of California cities and, just a lot of other cities. So there was going to be a wave of municipal defaults, regardless, even if times stayed pretty good. If we
Yes.
had 4% unemployment and minimal inflation and a placid geopolitical situation, these cities were still going to go bankrupt.
Right.
But now this is accelerating the process. They are going to crash and burn. And you know what they're doing? They're all hoping for a federal bailout. Mm-hmm. They're hoping Joe Biden gets elected and the Democrats bail out the big Democrat-run cities. Mm-hmm. Because that's their only hope. There's no way for them to make it on their own because they've screwed up so completely. And that would be a shame because to go back to the capitalism story, you need failure. You need people to screw up and then crash and burn so the rest of us can learn that lesson. So it would actually be good for the U.S. in the long run if a bunch of cities that screwed up their finances had to default. Mm-hmm.
And start again. Start over.
Yeah.
Start
and everybody,
fresh. Yeah.
And then everybody else who was thinking of screwing up in that same way would say, "Oh, I'm not going to do what Chicago did because I don't want to end up like those people."
That's too painful.
Yeah. And but if they bail those cities out, then that lesson will not be learned. The opposite lesson will be learned, which is that go ahead and run up as much debt as you want to and screw your pension plans up as much as you feel like it and, reap the benefits in the moment because in the future the government will bail you out. Yeah. So then everybody will do it. That's the definition of moral hazard, right? When you change the rules in such a way that people start behaving in ways they would never normally behave, but they see these new set of rules and it encourages them to take these chances and make these mistakes when they wouldn't do it otherwise.
Politicians get involved in directing their wishes or the people that are paying for their election campaigns, I suppose, or whatever the connections are, to pass laws that help them. It's interfering with the natural flow of things, and people would get along quite well, I think, otherwise, perhaps, many times. I just want to ask you then, with respect to, so we have these cities that are in big trouble, and then if let's say a Biden victory and a Democrat and a real socialist system in which they print money or tax people, certain groups of people, you could see things moving in the other direction where the red states are suddenly taxed very heavily or just taxing the middle class to pay for the cities, essentially, either through inflation or through direct taxation. And you have to think, John, that would create an awful lot of anger among the flyover people, huh?
Oh, yeah. If well-run cities in places where, the whole massive public sector union thing isn't a thing yet, Yeah. If they are taxed aggressively in order to pay for unfunded pension liabilities in other places, they're going to be angry and will divide even more severely along right-left lines when, that's it's not the right way to divide. We should be able to see that the 1% is orchestrating all this, but I don't think we will be able to. I think it's going to, if it works out that way. It could also work out that the federal government does not bail out all these cities and states and just lets them deal with their own problems their own selves, and that would be incredibly messy, but a lot healthier. And so there's no way to know how this plays out, but it's a minefield either way, because when you borrow huge amounts of money, you can't get out of it painlessly. You have to go through the pain of bringing things back into balance one way or another. And probably the way this is going to work is that we will, at the federal government level, we will bail out everybody in sight by creating trillions and trillions of new dollars. And then that shifts the pressure away from the guys who are screwing up here in the moment towards the currency. In other words, it gets harder and harder to maintain the value of the dollar as you're creating a mountain of new dollars. Yeah. And then instead of having a default crisis as all the bad debt comes due, you have a currency crisis in which the value of the currency starts to fall. And that's basically the gold story, right? Because historically, countries have done this many times in the past. And in each and every time, without exception, the people who owned real money weathered the storm pretty well as the government-run money lost value dramatically. So hard assets are where you want to be in a situation like this, where it really looks like the federal government is going to sacrifice the currency in order to protect a lot of the borrowers.
Right. Oh, that's the way it looks.
Yeah. So you want to own gold and silver in physical form as your dollar substitutes, and then you want to buy a bunch of gold and silver mining stocks as ways of dramatically increasing your capital. Gold and silver will preserve your capital. The mining stocks will increase your capital. And if history's any guide still, which I think it is, and I hope it is. That's been something that has worked many times in the past and will probably work again this time around.
Oh, well, for sure. And I kind of see mining stocks as a way of sort of hedging against what the government might do as well. I mean, during the 1930s, gold was confiscated. Let's just say that if gold needs to be used and the government needs to have the gold to reset the currency, if they need to do that, they could. I mean, I don't see any. I wouldn't have any idea that this government wouldn't, or any government, future government, wouldn't say, well, we need your gold, Taylor, hand it in, and you better do it. But the gold mines kept running in the 30s, and Homestake, for example, did extremely well. John, with just a minute left here, I want to ask you, do you see inflation rising? I said Daniel DiMartino Booth, talked last week about 5.3% in food costs in the U.S., 13% in China. That's pretty dramatic. I mean, do you see, and these are, of course, food doesn't matter much to that top 1%, but to the people that are living paycheck to paycheck, if they're lucky enough to have one, that's a big deal. Food, rising food costs.
Jay, I'm good. I'm glad you remembered to bring that up, because I'd forgotten about it, because that's really the big story this week, because Jerome Powell, the chair of the Fed, is going to make a speech in which he might outline a new inflation approach by the Fed, in which they average it out over time, which means low inflation in the past is going to be met with even higher inflation going forward than their 2% target. And if they do that, that changes everything.
Get your land and get your gold now, folks, I would say. It seems to me, if that's what's coming, and I think you're right. I mean, I can't see the government doing something that's difficult. I mean, they're going to take the easiest way out. They always do, right? So that means print money, do whatever you need to do. And because people don't really put 1 + 1 together, do they? They don't really understand. They don't think through it and realize that that there are consequences in raising. Everybody wants to have a free ride for now, and they don't seem to be too worried about the future.
Yeah, well, we haven't had to think that way for such a long time, because we've had a printing press. as soon as that printing press doesn't work anymore, we have to rethink the idea of what is money and what is the role of government. That's a debate that's coming up. And,
for sure. Definitely is. John, we'll have to leave it go at that, because we are out of time. Thank you so much for sharing your views on these very important topics, and we'll look to do it again sometime in the near future, hopefully.
Thanks, Jay.